Hello, I'm Sarah McDonald and welcome to this MSF TV special. If you've been watching some of our stories, you'll have become acquainted with the behind-the-scenes fieldwork of Médecins sans Frontières. One of the most dramatic stories shown on MSF TV is from the award-winning documentary film Living in Emergency. Part of it is the story of Dr. Davinder Gill, who spent 6 months in Liberia in 2005, running an isolated hospital in very harsh conditions. Only 26 at the time, he was the first and only doctor in Foya for 15 years. He joins me now to take a look back. Welcome, Davinder.
Thank you, Sarah.
Let's just have a quick look at part of the film.
Sure.
Okay, so we need 300 feet of steel rod. Do you copy? Is it alright if you lie down and press your stomach? I press very... No, please. Okay, let him sit. It's alright. It's okay. It's okay. So this is one of the interesting patients I'm bringing Kiara back to see after. His condition is one of just generalized swelling. Could have been something like E. coli. Associated with conditions like that, you can have renal disease. So at least that gives me a cause for current kidney disease and why it's so difficult to fix. Yeah, I'm glad. I mean, you know, I'm not glad, but yeah, I'm glad. It gives me a cause, and it means that there's nothing I can do. So at least I'm doing what I can do. I'll see you soon. I'll see you, and I press your tummy after.
So there you are. Tell us, what were you doing there? What was happening just before the cameras arrived?
Well, it was very isolated, like mentioned, and the war had devastated the area. So it was a devastated landscape where people were returning from their refugee camps in Sierra Leone and Guinea. They were trying to resettle their homes and rebuild, and there were no health services. So MSF had one of the health services, and a mission was being put up by a Christian organisation as well, and we were essentially providing the best we could. Treatment for tuberculosis, malaria, some of those tropical diseases, as well as severe infection and so on.
So I'm sure there was a lot was happening that the cameras didn't pick up. Tell us some of that.
Yeah, well look, lots of the good news stories were day-to-day treatment of tuberculosis. I remember really, in particular, an old gentleman who had walked a great distance to see us. He was old and skeletal and slim and weary. He had no family with him. He was coughing up bloody sputum, and so he had tuberculosis, which we could treat. Thankfully, we had the medications at the time. We had to put him in the isolation tent out the back, and he sat there dejected for a couple of months as we started treatment. But as he improved, we brought him into the hospital because he was no longer infectious. He began to smile, he was chatty, and he was well. And sending him home was one of the happiest days.
So when you look back on it now, do you remember those kind of success stories and the happier times? Has memory done that to you?
Absolutely. I remember those medical successes, but mainly the personal interactions, appreciating the Liberians and seeing how they struggle through the difficult times. I think about one grandma who was there when her daughter was giving birth, and I was called to the birth. It was difficult, it was obstructed, and the baby wasn't coming out. And so I was there mainly to help with the resuscitation of the child, and the midwife was helping the lady. The baby was delivered, but the baby was dead. And though we resuscitated, it failed. And the grandma was saying, "Thank God, thank God, thank God." And I was worried she'd misunderstood.
Yeah.
So through the translator I explained the baby had died. And the translator explained back to me that she understood perfectly well the baby had died, but she was just grateful that her daughter had survived.
Oh, the mother had survived, yeah. So there were some very frustrating bits as well, which you look like you're incredibly frustrated and annoyed. Let's just remind you of one of those.
Well, the situation is that OB, wash and reuse gloves. I do IV insertion, blood taking, and dressings without gloves. After asking all these things and all of this delay in communication, problems I have with Eric, problems that the rest of the team has with Eric and different members of coordination, you have worked in the field and you know that there is a limit where you just say, forget it, I'm fed up, right? And maybe that limit for you is there and that limit for me is there.
No, it's okay.
I've passed my limit and
what
I'm
happened?
not...
What happened when you pass your limit?
You just stop asking, you just wash your gloves.
I'm sorry, but I really insist on this. No one of us was aware of this problem, which is logistical and medical.
I came to him to explain to me. Now he says he doesn't want to do it.
Yes, but for example,
Come on.
you cannot say, why don't you do something? I said, fuck, why didn't you do something?
Yeah.
You know, sorry, I give the whole bloody thing back.
But once, if it's not done, you don't want to discuss again about that?
Yes,
But when the
because
person-
you have to do your job, otherwise go somewhere and
I do my job.
do your inadequate job somewhere else.
I do my
you come
job.
to the field, you come to Liberia, you do your job properly.
do.
Why do we need
Down,
coordination if we just have to solve all of our own problems
Don't
then?
shout.
So don't...
I do understand the anger. The anger is good. The anger is a part of the process, but they are fighting the wrong thing.
Are you doing it?
If I am working in the middle of a war and I get upset, get angry at the war. Because that is the reason for which you are there, and that is the reason for which you don't have the surgical ward that you are supposed to have. It's not MSF. MSF is nothing within this. You let me know what the problem is, and I do my best in order to solve the problem, and we solve the problem together.
Okay.
This
But
is my
what-
solution,
okay,
and I don't
what
have
I
a
need to
better
hear-
one. And
what I
this is
need-
not an ideal solution, because we are not working in ideal situation. What else can I tell you? Other than telling you, I am sharing at 100% the frustration that you are feeling. This is peace, love, and happiness.
So it looks incredibly intense and understandably really frustrating. So what was going on at the time that made you the most angry and frustrated, I suppose?
Well, we'd had the rainy season had arrived and all the roads had deteriorated, so our logistics and our supplies weren't arriving. So the entire team was down because all the work that the logisticians were supposed to be doing was being halted, and we weren't being helped with good solutions. Along with that, the pharmacy supplies. And so from my medical point of view, I'd recently found out that we'd run out of gloves and that the midwives had started washing them without even initially asking us. So not only I was surprised, I was upset, and I was taking it out on the coordination, who in a range of ways had not been as helpful as I'd hoped. They're supposed to be the experienced staff helping us in difficulty.
A bit later on, Chiara says to you, look, you know, it's kind of normal. It's expected that you would go a little bit crazy in this kind of situation. I mean, did it drive you a bit loopy? It's understandable, really.
Look, it drove me angry. I hope I didn't go loopy. But I was certainly angry. And I can imagine that the coordination, because I was sending angry emails to the point of threatening to leave, I was struggling to find a way to be heard and to improve the support for us there. So they saw a very angry man, and they came out that time. It was the second visit that they made to support, and in lots of ways it helped.
Because you were very isolated, weren't you, really?
We were isolated, and so they needed to provide the moral support, some direction, understand our issues, and that's the advantage we find even day to day here, is that face-to-face contact's important. So they started providing some of that.
Did you feel that Médecins Sans Frontières were failing you a little bit to that point with support and help that you needed?
A little bit, but I understood the challenges. MSF run on a tight budget. They run in difficult circumstances, and this was one of those. So you don't expect things to be smooth. You expect to be strained often, and they were. But I felt let down because the experience and the troubleshooting wasn't quite up to par.
What about your own experience? Do you look back at it now and think you were perhaps a little bit too inexperienced or a bit young?
I think probably I was at the right point to work in that area. Like I mentioned, it would have been nice if overall the team was better balanced with a bit more experience. You don't expect the whole team to be on their first mission, which was almost the case for us. So in that sense, if I was the more experienced person in the team, maybe I would have come up with more solutions, been able to adjust to the situation a bit better. But as a first missioner, there are so many rules. You're just trying to stick within your pattern of behaviour that you've been instructed, and so you just sort of one foot in front of the other, keep carrying on.
And what did that mean, actually, that isolation and frustration and the rain and the mud we saw with the car? What did that mean for how you could run the medical project?
Well, that pharmacy supplies were sometimes in short supply, like is mentioned regarding the gloves, that when the tuberculosis microscope was supposed to arrive, it came 2 months late and it was broken. It had broken in the truck on the journey. All of this when, if MSF compromised its independence and were happy to use the UN military helicopter, it would have arrived on time, unbroken. And that was the same for personnel too. If I needed to go on holiday or I needed to go to a meeting, I could have taken their helicopter, but we didn't, because we needed to be entirely independent. So
that independent medical action in Liberia that MSF is so fiercely protective of its independence, you found that kind of frustrating.
Yeah, well, that's right. Look, I mean, I agreed with that philosophy. So it didn't disappoint me, except when the Ashes were on and I really wanted to watch them on the UN military Pakistan Foxtel, but I couldn't.
Do you understand it now in retrospect, that fierce independent nature of the organisation?
Absolutely, and it's something that they have to keep re-evaluating. How do you work safely in these areas and remain independent? But I agree that it's the right way to go.
What do you think the benefits of it are that you can see now when you're out of the mud and the difficulty of the situation in the hospital?
Well, that you can choose the locations independently. You can even choose your medical treatment independently, because there are some treatment regimes directed by other agencies that might not be best practice, that MSF might disagree with, and you can then treat tuberculosis or whatever according to what you understand as the best practice at the and at the moment MSF is doing good prophylactic treatment for malaria, keeping well ahead of the curve.
So given that, what are the positive aspects you saw of your mission there?
For the families, it was high level medical care that I knew that they hadn't had for 5, 10, 15 years, and that we could provide that in the interim, and then as the hospital is rebuilt, then that would be continued. Those stories of individual success, that's the main thing that sticks with me.
Well, Davinder, let's have another look at you, a last look of you in Liberia.
No one here that's trying to die at the moment. The lady last night was really sick. She died. Nobody's that sick. Like they're going to die today. How long will it take you to go to Shello and come back? Okay, then you can carry the body then. You go with Francis, you carry the body, you come back. Very sorry. I didn't know her condition very well, but she was very sick, huh? Yeah, so we tried. It was really clear to me from the beginning, patients would be dying at night and I wouldn't be there. They'd be dying during the day and I'd have to be eating lunch. I think the first 2 patients who died were the hardest. Those 2 cases stressed me a lot at the beginning. Stressed me quite a lot. But after that, I think appropriately, I got more used to it. It just becomes part of the work and you just try your best. Let's give the glucose and give the artificial body. Shall we do that? I compare myself to others and I wonder whether another doctor in the same setting would have had the energy or whatever to spend longer with that patient, sleep less that night and get more work done the following day than I got done.
So looking back at that, obviously, you know, it was a really confronting time for you in terms of confronting much more death than you would say in Australia as a doctor. How do you look back on that now, about how you dealt with it and how well equipped you were?
It's tricky to know whether you can ever be well equipped for that. It's one of the things you learn through experience. And I learnt a lot about relating with families, understanding how different cultures deal with death, how routine it is for some cultures, and to the point where I had to readjust quite significantly when coming back to Australia to understand that once someone dies, you don't just take out their IV and pop them in a stretcher for the family to take away like we did in Liberia. It's a whole different process, one that's suitable to our society.
Yeah, so was it a big adjustment when you came back, a readjustment into our society and our medical profession?
Yeah, a readjustment to the medical profession, because you don't see anyone as sick as you see them there. And so it's sometimes difficult to pick up, well, it was initially difficult to pick up the more subtle illness, because there aren't so many subtleties in Liberia. And in day-to-day life, the big adjustment I had was just walking around my suburb. I was living in the inner city, walking on bitumenised paths through parks, thinking that all this money spent on a footpath and the roads in Liberia were impassable mud.
Yeah, it's all so strange when you get back from a place like that. How's it affected you, do you think, as a doctor and when you became a paediatrician? What do you take with you in terms of being a doctor from that time in Liberia?
I think I'm more in touch with how families are dealing with illness, more in touch with how the hospital as a whole has to structure itself and manage things, and have a much better appreciation of migrants and refugees, and I really enjoy seeing them in my day-to-day practice.
Is that right? You've got a completely different attitude, I suppose. And so would you go out on a mission again? I
really would, and I intended to soon after I finished my paediatric training, but I had a family, and that's not the time to go away, I don't think. Well, it certainly wasn't for me. But hopefully once the family grows older, I'll be on mission again.
And so what would you say to people who are thinking of signing up for Médecins Sans Frontières to go out in the field?
I'd say go right ahead as soon as you can. It's the best thing you'll ever do. It was for me, and I reflect on it frequently. I don't know how I'd be as happy in life if I hadn't done that work, to be honest. It really gives me a massive sense of satisfaction, and so go for it.
Thanks so much for talking to us today.
Thanks, Sarah.
Dr. Davinder Gill, who's part of the documentary Living in Emergency, and you can see some of that on the MSF TV channel.